Hi, welcome to the Chad Bozarth Show. Thanks for listening. Kenny Brown Jr.
Chad Bozarth, how are you, man?
Hey, man, I've been looking forward to this conversation because I have no idea what direction it's gonna go.
I was actually thinking about that before we started. I thought, should I call you and figure out what the world are we going to talk about? We have so much history.
So, before we get started, let me ask you. I listen to a lot of like financial YouTube videos and stuff, and a lot of times they start off by saying, "This is not financial advice." So, do we need to start off this conversation by saying, like, is that a disclaimer we should even say? Does that work?
Yeah, I'm not a compliance person, so I don't think I'm going to give any stock tips. Or actually, the one stock tip I always give is you should spend less than you make, and that one, and then save the rest, and you'll do really well. Just let it invest and let it grow and compound over time. So.
That's brilliant. Yes, spend less than what you make. That's good.
Well, seriously though, we have so many of our clients that we work with, and I'll ask them the question, it's like, what's made you successful? And a lot of them obviously are successful business owners or have honed their craft in whatever area they're in. And then, but it's really what they do with the cash flow that they get from their, business or whatever they do for a living. And so those that, live below their means are, I think a lot about it's being content. There's a lot of wisdom in just being thankful and living below your means and not looking to money to bring your happiness and joy. That I think a lot of people, a lot of our clients are. That's why they're successful in having generational wealth. Is they're not just thinking about the here and now. They're thinking about the future and how this can help their generation and their future. Because a lot of them, they didn't grow up with money. Surprisingly, a lot of people, they grew up rather some very poor, not a lot of money, and they just have learned to live with, uh, didn't have a lot growing up. So it's difficult sometimes though when you've got individuals that are really good savers, and then they have kids, and those kids grow up differently. Not no no, I mean. They just grow up differently. And Chad, I think you and I
Well,
have
okay, okay. So hold on. Uh, all right. I
to.
love the idea of generations, and I want to ask you about some of those kids' issues, if you can disclose some of that. But before we get to that, you're saying your clients. We met in Bible college like 20 years ago. So, how, what are you doing now, and how did you get to where you are now? Compared to when we used to hang out, I was just telling my wife, probably maybe some of your clients or colleagues might listen to this, but I'll just share this anyway. I was talking to Angela before we started this, and I was saying, I think that there's some of my friends that I'm the friend that makes them a little nervous because they don't know what I'm gonna do, kind of just with my goofiness or whatever. I told Angela that you you're probably the main good friend that I could think of that makes me kind of nervous a little bit.
I love to play that role in your life, Chad. That I don't know if you've ever shared that with me before. That I don't know
Really?
why. Yeah, I don't
I don't
like.
mean I don't mean it in a bad way.
Yeah, explain what you mean by that.
Well, it's so unpredictable.
Ah,
Yeah. Yeah, you don't fall into like not that anyway. Like I don't always know what you're gonna do, and I think you've mellowed out a little bit. But
oh
yeah, so
yeah.
so you've got clients now. So how did you get from a student at Bible college to where you are now? Where are you now? What are you doing?
So I work for a trust company, and for all intents and purposes, I administer trusts and estates and talk about tax planning. And I actually nerd out on reading trust documents and talking about the tax code. And last week I was in Kansas City at an estate planning symposium, and there was law professors and CPAs and that just talked about, the sunset provision that's happening with the estate tax going away. I mean, I can nerd out with the best of them. I think what makes me uniquely wired, to your point, is I love people. Like God has wired me in a way that I just love to learn from other people. I love to hear people's stories. And so really I look at it like I'm a fan of documentaries, Chad. The older I get, the more I'm like, heaven is going to be like just a, a, a way to like just see into people's like really see into their story, because so much of what we see of people is just a snapshot of what really is a culmination of what's happening over their whole life. And so being able to spend the time and just listen to people and hear their story. So it's really not about the money. I mean, that's obviously why they come to us, is because we're trying to preserve and grow the wealth and just make sure we don't lose it. But a big part of it is really transferring the values and the intrinsic values, the things that, not the tangibles, the intangibles that clients are hoping to pass on to the next generation. So, and that's really what has made them successful, if you think about it. It's not, I mean, of course, obviously they've learned to, what again, whatever that made them wealthy or help them to save and be good stewards of the money that they earned. But really, it's the principles of life, right? Like how to overcome obstacles that come in your life. I mean, so many business owners and families that I talk to, it's not that they've had an easy life. Most of them have had a lot of difficulty, but it's their ability to kind of overcome those issues and obstacles that come in their life. So to answer your question, though, I when I was in Bible college, I don't know, I think we talked about this before, but I did not plan to go to Bible college. When I was in school, I was actually a nerd, wore pleated pants to school, and basically had the pocket protector. I carried a briefcase. Need I say more? I carried a briefcase,
I
and
think I think it might have been, like, orientation at Bible college and you sat next to me.
yes,
I don't You might have introduced yourself as Doctor Kenny Brown Jr.
yes,
Like, I'm not
yes,
sure, but, like, I'm like, "Okay, this
yes,
is the first day of, like, I'm pretty sure we only get an associate's over here," like, but
yeah.
you're
So I'm a proverbial student. I love to learn. So that's why I like to refer to myself as, basically I've received an honorary doctorate from the Kenny Brown University, which actually plays into the role of like humility and the things that I'm learning through life that, but as a young whippersnapper, really young, yes, so I was going to go to business school, and I genuinely love business. Like I love studying businesses. I love working in businesses. I love free cash flow and allocation of capital. And so for me, I knew I wanted to be in business, but I didn't know what that looked like. So I originally thought maybe going to law school. Didn't want to practice, but thought, oh, it'd be good to get a law degree. I ended up going to get my MBA, and that's where I think you also did that as well. But I don't know, we
Yeah,
would.
you probably helped me get through some of those accounting
Oh,
courses.
that's right. We did do the managerial accounting, which, by the way, I don't know if you knew this, but when I interviewed with Guidestone, which is the company that I worked for after I worked at Fidelity Investments, they asked me, give us an example of a project you worked on from A to Z, and help us understand. And so I talked about the pizza business. Do you remember us doing that project in
Oh, yeah, I
school?
remember going to, I think it was Mr. Jim's Pizza
Yeah.
and standing with the guy, and yeah. Well, and that was maybe early managerial experience for you because you were helping me to pass.
But what's weird, I mean, but you would probably remember, I love that course. Like I love accounting. Like it's funny because
I
there's,
hate accounting. Like, I
I
will
know
go on
you.
rants against accounting. Like, this is arbitrary. Why are they just, I hate this. But yes, I am so thankful that you exist, Kenny.
Well, all that to say, I don't really consider myself an expert in any one thing. I'm a generalist. And but I so I so what led me to in this job I'm in is really divine, because I didn't know that this field even existed. Whenever I moved to Oklahoma from Texas, my wife got, the opportunity to go to residency at Oklahoma State or Oklahoma University as an OBGYN. And I didn't know what the heck I was going to do in Oklahoma, because I had interviewed in Houston and Chicago with banks and hedge funds. And I thought, well, what can I do? So I just kind of started interviewing with banks, regional banks, and then trust companies came across the platform. I thought, I don't know what really trust companies do, but they needed somebody that was in the finance, portfolio management. So I interviewed there, and it was like, I actually told somebody today in a presentation I made that I literally left that interview the day that I interviewed there and cried because it was like I had found my life's purpose. It was like a
Wow.
culmination of investment management, dealing with, people, the psychology of money. It was human behavior. It was the whole package. And I thought I could really see, I didn't, like I said, I didn't know much about it, but I knew enough to know that this is probably going to be a really good fit for me. And then it just so happened that the company that I ended up working for, they were going through a succession planning, and I was, 20 something years old. So I had a long runway, and the CEO, who became like another father figure to me, Mike, Carroll, he really took me in and under his wings, and he was the first person. Chad, you would appreciate this. I don't know if I ever told you, but he was the first person after our first client meeting. We walked out. He said it's normal for us to debrief, and you need to know you talked way too much in that meeting. And he just berated me. And I remember thinking, like, this guy hates my guts. Like, I'm about to get fired. And looking back, it was like one of the most loving and true, like, it made me realize that so much about human connection is listening and not talking. And that skill that I have honed over the years has made me who I am today. So I totally look to Mike as somebody who I'm so indebted to. And it's been great because unfortunately he did pass away, but I've gotten to know his family, and I mean, a lot of them live in Tulsa, and it's just so it's really cool just to actually not only get to experience it with our clients, but also obviously get to be firsthand, kind of like an entrepreneurial succession planning, almost like a father-son relationship, how it can be successful. You hear a lot of businesses that do have succession planning after the third generation. They call it shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves. So by the time it gets to the third generation, they've lost everything they've had, and they're back to, working blue collar jobs and trying to, save back up to get where they were before. And you can avoid that. It's just it takes a lot of intentionality and hard conversations. Like sometimes we have conversations with families that's, hey, Johnny may not be the best CEO for the next generation of this company. Let's really kind of figure out, look at personality, look at do some analysis on how is Johnny wired, to determine if that's really going to be the best course for him in his life, and really actually looking at what is his calling and purpose. So anyway, so that's a little snippet of how I landed where I am, and I really truly I look at it like it was just a glove that fit, and it just it's worked out really well for me in my career, to be in the position that I'm in now. Really, where I feel like I have felt that this for a while. For me, it's been like a calling. It's like I've always struggled with, should I go into full-time ministry? Should I go into business? This has been to me my what I was called to do. It's just work with families and help transition, not just the value, the money, but the intangibles from one generation to the next. And so it's an honor to be part of it, quite frankly. And I'm just thankful for that I found this as early in my career as I did, because I've actually hired some people in our office who all of our trust officers are attorneys. They've gone to school. They don't practice law because so it's non-traditional law, but she's a registered nurse and an attorney, and also does worked for the Oklahoma tax commissioner, but found this basically later in her life. And she told me, I wish that I could have found this earlier because she's just so well suited to it. So I am very grateful that I came across this. And I don't think that would have happened had I stayed in Texas. I mean, there were people in my life that had been in the trust business that probably could have said, "Oh, you ought to consider that as a career path," but I don't know on the surface if I would have just said, "Oh, that sounds interesting." It's just the way that it all played out. So, yeah.
So what would you say to, because I'm so encouraged by that, because sometimes I look at just life in general, and I mean, it's not my responsibility, but I feel sad or I get frustrated when I see people who have giftings or strengths, but somehow they're just not plugged into the right spot. And it's like, how can that person get plugged into the right spot? So, if you were talking to somebody who was 18 or 19 years old, just coming out of high school, what would you say to them? Because you, like you said, you didn't even know working with trusts and whatever you're doing right now, you didn't even know that existed. So what would you say to somebody who doesn't know what they're supposed to do with their life? And not that anybody does. I think maybe that's a myth that you seem to have had clarity. I
Yeah.
think a lot of people don't have clarity and they think something's wrong with them because they don't have clarity, and I don't think that's the case. I think a lot of people don't
No,
have clarity.
no. And I do think
Um,
that it could, over one's life, that your career could look, or what you do for a living could look different, depending on the stage of life you're in. I actually was reading, this is some deep theology. You probably read this to your kids, Pete the Cat books. Are you familiar?
I'm familiar. I don't think we have any in our library, but I am familiar.
You should definitely consider getting you some. So they've got one that has quotes. And there were several last night, and I can't remember Alexander Hamilton, but a lot of the quotes are centered around basically don't be afraid to fail in life.
Yes,
Like,
yes.
and I don't know if you feel like this with your kids, but like I'm T-ball coach for my son right now, and I even find myself like whenever he makes a mistake or one of the players, I kind of, and I'm critiquing them, and I can see that they're just trying to be whatever I'm trying to help them as far as a coach goes. And I've learned, like, you know what? And I think it was who was it that invented the light bulb?
Thomas Edison.
Thomas Edison said, I didn't fail uh, 10,000 times. I just found 10,000 ways that it didn't work.
Yeah,
And so what I've said to my son recently last night, and we do the bedtime routine. I said, just because you feel it, something that helps you that's actually instruction on, okay, that's not the right way to do it. And
yeah,
you learn another way. But it's hard to have that perspective when you're 6. I mean,
yeah,
goodness, it's hard for me to have that perspective at almost 40 years old. But I find that that's actually like what I think we're supposed to be like a child. Like we're supposed to like not be afraid to fail and
yeah.
get out there and make mistakes and so I don't know, it's been a principle. I feel like, so back to your question about 19, it's like go and like try something that you don't think you can do, because yeah, you may not be successful at it, but you'll learn pretty quick. Yeah, I like that, or well, I really don't like that. So then that helps steer you in maybe a direction that you wouldn't have gone otherwise, because you realized that's just not, it's not what you enjoy. It's not how you're wired. Because I mean, certainly for me, I would have thought, oh, you know, I always knew that I'd probably work with people and maybe even like sales, but I didn't like the idea of selling somebody something that they didn't either need or want. And also that I was going to try to convince them to buy something. And it wasn't until I realized, like, even in this business, that it's not about selling as much as it's about educating, which then instills trust and empowers that person to make a decision that's best for them. I was actually in Fort Worth on Wednesday for a small business owners conference. We've got an office there. And one of the things that they talked about is, how much when people make a decision to buy, how much of it's predicated on emotion and just like somebody, their ability to perceive, whether they can trust. And so it's easily, you probably remember this from our graduate studies. It's easy to, you've got the data. Businesses can manipulate if they do a good job of it to try to get the consumer to buy their product. And it's like, okay, let's use that reverse engineer. It's like, if you know that, for example, you know that you need to save and spend less than you make. So what are ways that you can re-engineer your life so that it's easier for you to do that? And it's so that you don't, end up, it's not something that you're forcing yourself into. It's like it just happens because of the way you've set up your life. And so I feel like with kind of back to just trying to educate clients and not sell them. It's more so about just building the trust and helping giving people the tools so that they set themselves up for success rather than trying to set themselves up for failure. So like we've got clients who struggle with drug and alcohol addiction, beneficiaries. And so, we talk about what are things that we can do, if you're in a job or if, you're in a relationship that's causing you to have a lot of friction or stress in your life. It's kind of taking a holistic approach, versus, well, just try to, grin and bear it and hopefully you'll figure it out. There's some wisdom in help asking other people to help give you some guidance and some tools that can help you be successful. You know, with apart from obviously praying and asking God to help you, there is some wisdom that I have found in surrounding yourself with people who, have lived life and have figured out ways to avoid the things that they know that aren't going to make them successful. So,
Why do you think that it's so difficult sometimes for people to talk about finances? It's kind of like, it seems like one of those issues where it's like the blood pressure goes up and people, it's uncomfortable for a lot of people to talk about money. Why do you think that is?
well, there is have you probably seen the Netflix series, is it Think Think and Grow Rich, or have you know what I'm talking about? Yes, I will teach
I
you to be rich.
I
Yes,
love that.
I will
Yes.
teach you to be rich.
Yeah, I love that. And you mentioned the
So
psychology of money earlier. I got that book too. That
and actually
anyway.
he just wrote another book that went pre-sale on it's kind of like it's how to spend money. So it's about
Okay.
like the psychology of actually spending money versus saving it. But anyway, um, so he talks a lot about your childhood. And
Mm.
I've never really thought of it that way, but so we see it, obviously. I see it in my job. But how you were raised around money and the conflicts that happened in your home, um, like for me, my dad lost his job a couple of times growing up as a kid, and my dad, even with losing his job, always found ways to make money and, did odd jobs and but it was a source of not having money and constantly struggling, and um, that has impacted the way that I view money. And then obviously the nothing amplifies the way you view money than when you get married, right? You come in and you have these two very different drastic views of money, and so people, it's funny. I say this to clients all the time. I'm actually terrible with money. I love to spend and have fun with experiences. And like we were talking about in college, Erin, and when I would go visit her in Fort Worth when she was in med school, I'd be like, "Hey, let's go out for dinner. We haven't seen each other in a week." And she's like, "I've got stuff at the apartment, like let's eat at home." And I'm going, "You're so boring. Like, let's go out and have some fun." And so I think I've learned, like, for her, it's not so, I mean, it's just for her, she's just wired different, and that, it's like if you've got the food there, don't, that's wasteful just to go out and spend money to.
Although I will say, you were at my wedding in Vegas and I got married in Las Vegas
That's right.
and I had just a little bit of money and I wanted to play blackjack,
Oh, that's right.
just a
That's
little
right.
bit. And you act like you're a spender, but you would have acted like I was about to mortgage my house or so like
I do
how
remember that.
in my mind I was like, okay, I understand people are like gambling's wrong 100% of the time. Okay, I understand that. But in my mind, I'm like, okay, this is a unique circumstance. I would blow $50 going to the movies, popcorn, and drink. So in my mind, it's in that category, right? But you were acting like I was. So you act like you're the big spender, but
You're right. Well, I think
I
that's what
we
there are
had a little
things.
bit of a conflict at that
That's
time.
true. I do remember that. I have to apologize to you for that event though, because
No, you don't
I
have to
felt like I
apologize.
was,
That was great.
well, I had a great time. I
Yeah,
still remember how hot it was there that
it
time.
was so hot.
It was so hot. And I love
Some
Vegas,
people,
but
I remember some people can't believe that I got married in Las Vegas. They're like,
yeah,
did Elvis marry you? It's like, no, Elvis didn't
no, yeah,
marry me. It was like a
yeah,
great, anyway.
yeah. No, that was a
But
good
yeah,
one.
so no, you were like, your money manager side was coming out.
No, you're right. I think it's because for me, the thought of putting money in a slot machine and hoping it's just like the antithesis of everything that
Yeah,
I do that
I know, I know.
but again, it's an experience. So I could see where somebody could say, "Hey, I like to go because like play blackjack or whatever because I love the experience of getting to go and do that." But I know what happens at a lot of those casinos, which is, I mean,
Yeah.
go look
Well, it's
aside and
sad.
it's like,
Yeah, you see people at the slots and you
yeah,
know they've been there all day and it's horrible. So,
yeah.
okay,
Again, I'm not.
yes.
Yeah, we did.
So
I didn't
yeah,
even go
you could
into that
argue
side.
that even doing a little bit is contributing to that, which I could see that too.
Right. But so to your point about like there are things that I will spend my money on, there are certain things I will not. But I have learned like saving, like paying yourself first. Obviously there's the principle of tithing and that's but I'm talking as far like taking that what you need to be prudent in saving off the top and then you can spend the rest. That's worked well for me. For some people, they can just bifurcate it and they look at it differently. But for me, so I remember, before I got married, just being like, hey, I'm gonna have it fun. I'm gonna go and travel, but it's gonna be what's left over after I've done, so that's kind of why I go about optimizing. And there's a lot about that's not something I've thought on my own. I mean, that's been written by several people and people in the financial industry that talk about, ways to optimize your, using your own behavior, to help you live more successful, whatever the goal is. Um,
It's so true what you were talking about though. Like my wife, uh, I mean, she's way better with money than I am. It's like I have all of these ideas or whatever, but she's so good at managing things. And that's I got this other book, which I had to confess I didn't read it because all the statistics my eyes start glazing over. But he talks about that in this book, The Millionaire Mind.
mhm.
And it's really good. And it's all of these statistics. I mean, you're familiar with it, but I'm just saying it anyway. All of these statistics about, the average millionaire is not the person driving the Lambo that you think is a millionaire. It's like they live in a normal house and they drive a normal car and all of that stuff. But one of the things he says in this book is how important it is the person that you marry is like,
Yeah,
that's one of the most important things.
absolutely, absolutely, absolutely.
And I know that almost seems like obvious, but like
Mm-mm,
it
mm-mm.
makes a difference.
It does, absolutely.
So on that note, let me ask you then, speaking of generations I love and dealing with people who have become wealthy for however they did, and then now you're dealing with them and maybe they're getting older and they're thinking about succession or whatever and dealing with those family dynamics. Is there a story that you could share that wouldn't or maybe not a specific story, but what would be your thoughts on just the whole um baton passing of the generations that you've seen, especially with regard to wealth and the accompanying values?
So I think because I actually um, I would say the common theme is, parents that are intentional with their kids from a very early age about not giving them things. There's the ability, there's the I can give it to them because I have the money, and I'm not giving it to them even though I have the money because I know it may not be good for them. And so it's the wisdom to know when and every kid's different, as you know, right? You've got three kids, I've got three kids, and each one of them is wired differently. And so I think being able to, recognize and understand, how each of your children is wired and, helping them understand the value of hard work. Um, and so I've been, it's really hard. Like I see clients that have enough money and, they could easily, support their kids and to watch them, essentially their children have a very similar childhood to what I had, even though they have a lot more money. Like
Mm,
that takes a lot of intentionality, right? Because
mm,
it's one thing to do that when you don't have the money, but when you have the money and yet you don't want your kids to be raised like that. Um, I would say it starts at a young age for sure. But I would also say a lot of the parents that we worked with, a lot of families, they made mistakes along the way. Um, and I think the one thing that I've learned is I think parents they give either themselves too much credit when their kids are doing really well with money, and they give themselves too much credit when their kids don't do well with money.
Mm,
And so the reality is, yes, we have an influence on our kids and our families, but they also have agency and they can make their own decisions. And sometimes those decisions are not good. And that's not necessarily because you didn't teach and train them well. It's just they decided to, that was kind of that part of their learning experience, and they've had to, make decisions that way. So what I find is it's not uncommon, and we always talked about this today with the law firm we're working with, is you're working with a family and you have one child out of the kids that is really good with their money. So they inherently become the de facto successor trustee in the family once mom and dad start to have any, cognitive issues or, incapacity or death. And then, you start to build resentment with the other kids because they're like, Johnny or whoever's always the one who's been the favorite child and now he's got all this responsibility. And it ends up creating this in conflict in the family. And
mm,
so a lot of times that's why people will hire a third party corporate trustee because they aren't part of the family and
mm,
they can help be the independent, and they can serve alongside the child who was named so they can be co-trustee, or in some cases that child's better off just saying, you know what, I don't want to I don't want to be the source of conflict, and I'd rather have the parents make the decision to just let somebody else come in and do that. So I think recognizing the fact that some children are going to need money put into a trust for their benefit because they'll never be able to handle it. And I
mm,
have seen parents who are objectively honest with themselves to say, we're not going to, we're not, it's not that we're not trying, we're always going to try to instill good behavior and try to help them, live independently, but recognize that they're probably not going to be able to do that. It's just not one of the skill sets they have. And so it's really loving when a family recognizes that and actually puts it into trust for their benefit. And I've actually seen it work extremely well, where the trustee can build a relationship with that beneficiary. Again, it's for us, we start, with families working multiple generations. So we've worked with mom and dad or even grandma and grandpa, and so we've got this long history that we've developed, and it's not just, oh, this is just some guy at a bank who, is doling out the money. It's we've actually spent the time in doing a financial plan and helping them with their filing their taxes and, if they wanted to start a business to help them explore that. So it's a collaborative team approach. And, we may be part of that team. We may be there for part of the time, and it can look different. It doesn't have to be a one size fits all approach. But I've seen it work really, really well where it's having the team of people around you and recognizing that, in order to have, multi-generational wealth, it's going to take a team of people, and it's not just something that um, you're going to be able to do on your own. So that's been it's humbling sometimes because obviously we're working with people who've been very successful on their own, but they recognize that they're not always going to be there. And so when when they're interviewing us and determining whether or not we're a good fit, for them to say, you know what, I see your line of thinking. I see how you would handle my son and my daughter, and it's similar to how I would do it. And again, we're listening to them, and we love when clients, a lot of times outside of the four corners of a trust document, they will write a letter of intent. We recommend that they do that, and it really helps to convey what was the reason why they set it up the way they set it up. So, like,
mm,
I've had clients where their child went off to college, graduate school, gainfully employed, but they realize that probably getting this kind of money this early in their life, say in their 20s or even 30s, could be harmful and detrimental, maybe take away the incentive, and they want them to be successful on their own so they can prove to themselves and to others that they are capable. And so they've decided to say, you'll get a little bit over time, but really this money is for, it's almost like more like retirement than it
Mm,
is like this is money that you're going to live and live, have money to live on and to support you throughout your life. So it's there if you need it for health, maybe they limit it to health or education. But really, that the purpose of setting it up in trust is not to support them so that they can just go to the Bahamas and not have to work again. It's really there to say, hey, we want to give a hand up, not a handout. And so that's what's fun for us is that a lot of our clients they that resonates well with them, but they don't really know how to do that. So we can say, oh, well, we've got some tools. There's 529 plans you can use for college savings. You can supercharge, superfund them. We've got clients that do that. There's obviously different types of trust that you can set up. And even for clients that maybe have children that have special needs, they who may receive government assistance, there are tools that you can use to be able to help them not get disqualified from those government assistance programs, even though that they're going to inherit a good amount of money. But recognizing that, it's going to potentially take a lot of money depending on what that special needs is. Um, and, you want somebody there who's going to be able to take care of your child or your family member like you would if you were there. So that's really what we do is we say, help us understand what you're doing and is that something that we can be able to do? And does the document that you're asking your attorney to draft allow us as the successor trustee to be able to do that for you? So it's very much a collaborative process. I will say we really what works seems to work best is when we work with families before there's an event like death or incapacity,
mm,
because then we have a flavor of what that looks like. But that's kind of I don't know if that answers your question specifically, but that's broadly how it works. Is that it's much
yeah,
more of a it's not a I can't point to like, oh, it's just this one thing that they do. I wish it was a silver bullet because trust
yeah,
me, I would just tell everybody and write books about it and then I could go home and I don't think trust companies, would be needed. But the reality is it looks different for everybody. And so, and I think too, people a lot of times think that you have to have mega wealth to have a trust. And the reality is you really don't. I mean, trust are what they do is they allow you to um, you know, fulfill your wishes if you weren't here in a way, in a manner in which you would want it to be done. Because a lot
mm,
of people, they don't do any kind of estate planning. They die. They go through, if they don't have a will, they have to go through probate, which is you have to go through courts, and then it could be contested, and it just can get really messy. And it doesn't have to be like that. You can, if you do it right and spend a little bit of time, uh, it can be a really, we have around Valentine's Day, we usually say the most loving thing you can do for your loved one is to do an estate plan because I can't tell you how many times I've worked with families, mom and dad pass away, maybe there was some issues in the family and everything goes very smooth and
mm,
they see they're like thank you so much for all the work that you did on the front end because we are experiencing all that hard work that you did working with our parents or our loved ones. So to me it's very rewarding work. It's
yeah.
you can see it.
That is so good. Well, that is really good, Kenny. Before we before we wrap up, I want to get a word of encouragement from you, but I guess my last question that's kind of in my head is we've talked about like the end of life and the importance of planning for that and the transition. But what if somebody's listening and not financial advice or anything like that, but what if somebody's listening with books and TV shows and YouTube videos, which I know this is one, but like there's so much noise and there's so much coming at us about you should do this, you should do that. What if somebody is in a place where maybe they grew up like you, they're starting out, they want to do well with their money, but there's so many voices coming at them. Should they go read Dave Ramsey? Should they, like what somebody who has the heart desire, hey, I want to change my circumstance. What would you say to that person? Because there's just so much noise.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, I would say, having a level of humility when it comes to personal finance. I know for me personally, and you've seen this hopefully in my life, Chad, but it's when you start out and you're in grad school and you're making A's or maybe not on accounting exams. um, you kind of start to think like, oh,
No
now
comment.
no, no, I'm going to get all the answers. Um, but as you go through life, you realize, life happens, right? Like people get diagnosed with cancer and people, I mean, we've lived it with families where people die suddenly of issues or they get sick. And so I think the reality is life is hard. And I think giving grace to yourself is really important. Um, and then just really like I think all of us probably know of somebody in our lives that has been a good steward of their money. And so, I mean, I would say, just like start out in your own circle of friends and people that you know who that you could trust and seek their counsel because actually a lot of our clients come from clients that referrals, people that we've worked with who, and that's probably the best marketing we ever get is when somebody works with us, they, have a good experience, and then they go off and tell their family and friends. And so I do think that, um, I see a lot of people that they want help. They say they want help, but then they're really not interested in hearing from other people or asking for that wisdom. And so they continue to perpetuate the same problem over and over again. And I will say I've done that before in my life. There's been things that, continuously I get convicted on and I have to be humble and recognize that, what, I've believed this thing for a long time and now I probably need to reconsider, you know, how I think about that. Um, so it's actually made me realize there are a lot of things that have happened in my life that obviously, that I work hard, but a lot of it was just I was very fortunate, be at the right place at the right time when I got, you know, and so it's a tremendous responsibility to then take the success that you've had and the resources that you have and to be a good steward of it. So I feel like the people out there that God has blessed and given them wisdom to be good stewards. They want to share that information with you. And so I think if you can be, um, you know, so that I know I agree. I think there's a lot of noise out there. I think, Dave Ramsey's great. I mean, there's a lot of good resources. Um, but at the end of the day, you know, eh, changing somebody's mind, as you know, I mean, it's not easy. And so it's going to have to be a broken spirit and a contrite heart. And
Mm,
I've learned, I've learned that in my own life that, you know, coming at it with I've got all the answers or I think I know the answers. I just want to affirm what I already believe. I think is it happens to us more than what we care to believe. So
mm, man, that's good. That's good. Kenny, thank you for joining me, man.
thank you for having me. This has been fun.